Hey guys, this is going to be a longer video today. It's a sort of deep dive into the Hammer Frankenstein series, mostly focusing on the third film. I thought by the third film there's a lot to talk about with this series. So I'll kind of be summarizing the first two films, and it occurred to me there are going to be some spoilers in this video. So if you aren't looking for that, go ahead and check these fantastic films out first and then come back and check out the video. Anyway, here we go. Thanks.
Hey everybody, Mr. Dan here back again with another review. This time it's the third film in the Hammer Frankenstein series, The Evil of Frankenstein. I just watched it the other night to get ready for Franchise Frenzy Part 3s. Part 2s came out today, but I wanted to get a jump on the Part 3s. And after watching the second one, Revenge of Frankenstein, I was just kind of intrigued because I was a little fuzzy on this one, you know, so I wanted to watch it right away. So just to review, I thought this one was going to be worth talking about. It's very interesting. It comes to a crossroads in the Frankenstein series, so to speak. But just to review, late 50s, you had The Curse of Frankenstein. I don't have any standalone movies. I've got one on the way, the last one that I need. But you got The Curse of Frankenstein with Peter Cushing, Hazel Court, the lovely Hazel Court, Robert Urquhart as his assistant, and starring Christopher Lee as the monster. The first and the second one both directed by Terence Fisher, always a plus. The second one was Revenge of Frankenstein, which I talked about a little bit on my part 2s of Franchise Frenzy. Really good continuation of the story that establishes that this series will be following Dr. Frankenstein, and the monster will be different in every series. In the second one, he's not so much even of a monster. It's a guy that they went to transplant a live brain into. He's not especially monstrous. In this one, they have a guy named Kiwi Kingston, who apparently was a wrestler, I think. He's big. I don't think he was the biggest. He's kind of actually somewhat narrow. I don't. But he's big enough. There's a scene where he comes shambling down the street, and the town drunk sees him, and it's one of those kind of semi-comical scenes. He flips out. Of course, he's got these giant platform boots on, and look, I'm pretty sure Karloff wore them. I know he did, and Fred Gwynn wore them on the Monsters, even though he was quite a tall guy. But they really don't hide it at all in this, and they even have close-ups, and it's almost like, well, why would you put this monster in these giant boots? He's kind of stumbling around as it is. Whatever. Anyway, the first film is famous for the extremely detailed contract that they had to sign with Universal. Universal did not want this creature to resemble their Frankenstein's monster. So the makeup for Christopher Lee in the first one was indeed hideous and monstrous. Really good makeup effects. And then, as I said in the second one, you have basically a guy, and he's not especially monstrous. In this one, you have, as I said, Kiwi Kingston playing the monster, and Universal had relented a little bit and allowed for more similarity, so he does have that sort of classic Frankenstein's monster look to a degree. A giant square head, kind of almost like a blockhead. It's interesting, the electrodes are up here, they're not on his neck. That's one difference. We'll talk about the makeup in a moment. Yeah, and this film reminded me of the Universal series a lot, and then also, I think they may have borrowed a little bit from another Hammer film with Peter Cushing. We'll get to that in a moment. But anyway, and much like, this one starts out, okay, so the second one began right after the first one. Somebody saves Dr. Frankenstein from the guillotine, and he escapes, and he sets up shop under an alias and continues his experiments. And he meets a doctor who eventually becomes his assistant, and the authorities eventually close in on him, and things go haywire as they usually do. So then he has to flee. So this one starts out, he's got a little laboratory that he's made for himself, and he has a new assistant, and they don't really explain it. So he's just there, and that will now sort of set the tone for the rest of the series, or at least the next movie, where Thorley Walters will just be his assistant. I mean, there's no explanation of it. You don't see the evolution of how somebody who was either working with him or was even against him sort of was swayed over to his side. He just has an assistant. So this one kind of hits the ground running. And, he pays a gravedigger to steal a body. So there's a poor guy who dies. His parents go to get the priest. They leave his little sister. Imagine living back in those times. The sun goes down and it's just dark, like dark, dark. Your older brother dies and your parents are like, you stay here with the body. We'll be right back. And then she opens the door and she sees someone reach in the window and literally yank this guy out of the window. And she's screaming. She runs after him. She sees Dr. Frankenstein. The family comes back. They go to Frankenstein's lair. And that's where you meet his assistant. They immediately start taking out his heart. And much like the previous one, a lot of the effects involve seeing the body parts and so forth. He puts it in a tank and he massages it, at the time it must have been pretty shocking, I think. So in the laboratory is cool. It's a very confined space, but they got a lot of really cool equipment. They've got this giant wheel they got to get going to generate electricity. But then the priest has followed the gravedigger. So he comes in the middle of all this and he's like, oh, you defilers. This is like just the devil's work to him. So he takes his cane, he starts smashing stuff. So they have a struggle, and the priest runs away, but they're like, well, and the experiment is ruined, so he's like, we got to get out of here. They're going to be on our tail. So they take off, and they actually go back to Frankenstein's castle from the original one, because this is like 10 years later. And his assistant's like, you sure that's wise? And I have to say, it does strain believability. I mean, it's a Frankenstein movie, but so it may seem funny for me to say this, but it does strain believability a little bit because Dr. Frankenstein he's evil in this series, and you see that as it progresses. But he's also very intelligent, so he really does some kind of questionable things. He goes back to the town that he originally fled from, and they go there, and there's a carnival. Always great to see a carnival going on. And there's a mind reader guy named Zoltan. And they also meet a deaf-mute girl, or see a deaf-mute girl. She later becomes part of the team, so to speak. But they put on masks, but then he goes into a pub, and he sees the Burgermeister. So he's going to set up shop in the basement of Frankenstein's castle, and it's cool. There's some really good matte paintings, I would say shots, but they're half shots of country roads, and then there's a matte painting of a valley and of Frankenstein's castle. I love that stuff. So they go in there, and it's a mess, but they start to get things going again. Lots of cool electricity effects in this. Lots of things sparking and everything. He's in this pub, and his assistant's like, you sure this is wise? And it's really not when you think about it. And then he sees the mayor, the Burgermeister, and he's with a woman who looks to be somewhat younger than he is, and that's where you have the cleavage. I mean, I'm just going to come out and say it because that's what you get in every one of these movies. But the Burgermeister has his ring on, so he and there are police in the bar, in the pub, and he flips out, and he calls all this attention to himself. So then they have to run, so they hide in the circus in Zoltan's exhibit, or as this guy Zoltan is hypnotizing people. And then the police start giving Zoltan a hard problem and saying, what about your permits and stuff, And they kind of ruin him, so he's got to leave town. Let me back up. They head to a cave, and that's where they meet the deaf-mute girl, who's played by an actress named Katie Wilde. She's very good in this, very good. Those parts are not so easy to play. And she has a lot of pathos, she's really good. And there they find the frozen monster. They have to take refuge in the cave. That's where she lives, and she helps them out a little bit and gives them a piece of old bread to eat, And then Dr. Frankenstein looks up, and the monster is encased in ice, and it's pretty cool. And that is a throwback to the Universal films when, in one of the films, you found Frankenstein's monster encased in ice. So they thaw him out. Having said that, let me back up. Before that, Dr. Frankenstein, as they're going back to the castle, he's like, "Oh, I had it made back in the old days. I almost had it." And then they have almost like a mini condensed Frankenstein movie where he has his flashback back when he was in the castle, he operates on this guy, that looks like Frankenstein's monster, and he's got him in this giant metal cage. In this set, I'm not sure if this set and all this equipment is the same as the original movie, but it's a much different room. So it's very cool. They have two lab scenes, very elaborate lab scenes, right back to back, with different types of equipment in each one. And he basically tells the story of getting this trying to revive this creature, and then the townspeople come and he has to flee. So here's the thing, continuity wise, when the heck did that happen? Because right after the Christopher Lee monster is unalived and everything, and Dr. Frankenstein's arrested, after that the events of the second movie happen immediately. So he was in prison then. So, and that's kind of something that happened in the Universal films too, with all the sequels, with the Wolfman and everything. Frankenstein was here, he was there, he's wearing a furry vest, he's in ice. You don't really think about some of this stuff too hard. I know James, on Cinemassacre, he dissected it, and there's some continuity errors. So I don't know when this was supposed to happen, but they find the same monster frozen in ice. And the problem is, he's alive, he kind of like flutters his eyes, but they try to jumpstart him, so to speak, and they can't. So, wait a minute, this guy Zoltan is, so Dr. Frankenstein barges into Zoltan's room as he's getting ready to leave town, and he basically, he tells him who he is, and he's like, "It's pretty bold of you coming here, you're like a wanted man." And he goes, "Well, like, we need each other." So he gets Zoltan to come back, to kind of hypnotize this guy, the monster, and to wake him up. The problem is, he's under Zoltan's control. Nobody likes this guy. He's shady. He's like, "Oh, I'll have another drink." And now the deaf mute girl, she lives with them too, and she's cleaning up the place and helping and everything. So Zoltan says, "Oh, you know what? I have a monster at my control." So he sneaks in there at night and has the monster go into town and steal a bunch of gold valuables and stuff. And a couple people see him, and he comes back with bloody knuckles. And Dr. Frankenstein's like, "What's up with this?" And eventually that whole relationship goes south. The authorities close in, as is often the case. And at the end, the assistant and the deaf mute girl, I hate to keep calling her that because I don't know her name, but they escape, and Dr. Frankenstein and the monster are in the laboratory. And the monster flips out. Okay, he flips out. He wrecks the place, and I guess these guys are all big drinkers, because he picks up a whole vat of, he throws some alcohol around, then he picks up the whole keg and he throws it, and there's short circuits some of the electrical equipment, and then you have fires breaking out, and that's kind of where it ends. Now, the film also, right before that, as that's happening, the creature kind of rebels against Zoltan. And that reminded me of The Mummy, the Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing Mummy, when what was his name? Ahmed. The Egyptian guy who was controlling the mummies, like, attack! And Christopher Lee rebels against him and ends him, pretty graphically. Well, guess what happens to Zoltan? After a while, the monster's like, "You know what? I'm getting tired of you." It's a pretty good scene. Then he comes after Dr. Frankenstein, and he had Zoltan had they thought Zoltan was gone, you see. So he came back, and he still has the monster under control. He starts speaking to him originally through this iron grate. So the monster reaches up, breaks it apart. Now he's got these wrought iron posts with points at the end. So he comes after Dr. Frankenstein with one of those and misses. And Peter Cushing, who was pretty, he was pretty spry. He wasn't, maybe as physically intimidating as someone like Christopher Lee, but he does like a somersault over the desk, and it just misses him. And that whole sequence reminded me of The Mummy, when Peter Cushing is the one that reaches up, grabs the spear, hits it, sticks it into Christopher Lee as the Mummy, and then when that doesn't work, he has to somersault over the desk. The whole sequence was very familiar. I thought that was pretty cool, actually. So yeah, an interesting movie. I would probably rank them so far in the order that they came out. 1, 2, and 3. This one is not a distant third, though. It's still pretty good. The first two is it's hard. It's like almost a toss up. The first one of the things. I mean, listen, if you're really into makeup effects and everything, the first one is that's the monster. That is a very unique looking Frankenstein's monster design. This one, they're okay. It's not. It looks like a big globs of plaster of Paris were shoved on his face and then molded. Like it's just a giant blockhead. It's probably a little too big, and then his initially when you see him in the cage, metal cage, I think you could even see like a gap between like his eyebrow and where the makeup, I'm gonna call it plaster because that's what it looked like, is. And then later, they use it's all painted black to close the gap. I see that was a little slip up, I think, and it looks okay. He wears like ratty clothes and those giant boots. I could have used a little more monster action as far as the demonstration of brute strength, but it was okay. It was okay. Again, in this series, we're following Dr. Frankenstein, not so much the monster, but it is kind of cool to see good monster effects. Okay, so the next one will be Frankenstein created women. This one will be, so we'll have to see for my Franchise Frenzy Part 3s, which will be the last Friday in March. It'll be interesting to see where this one, the Evil Frankenstein, ranks is for all the Part 3s. I think it might actually do pretty well. I think some of the other franchises are going to drop off a little bit, and this one's going to pretty much stay steady. And that concludes my review of The Evil of Frankenstein. What are your thoughts on this one? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks. Bye.